free to enable the closed captioning. That can be helpful for some people. Well, welcome everyone. You have entered the Zoom room this morning of a 3-part series, Healthy Sexuality After 60 with Barry McCarthy. We are all aging every day. No surprise to anybody here. And the good news is that the way that we are aging is changing, and mostly for the better. Our ability to live longer, healthier, more productive lives is improving. And unfortunately, many of us don't see it that way. Attitudes and stereotypes about aging haven't changed, including attitudes about sex and aging. We're getting a little feedback, so we're just going to ask everybody here to mute. Thank you so much, if you don't mind. All right, my name is Rebecca Chaplin, and I'm with AARP North Carolina. I'm the Associate State Director with AARP North Carolina in the Mountain Region. This morning, we're going to embark upon a 3-part series to change the conversation about age and aging and sexuality. Aging is about growth, not decline. It creates new opportunities, not just challenges. Older people are contributors, not burdens. And each and every one of us should be valued for who we are, not by how old we are. And that's why we believe that we deserve to have a pleasure-oriented touch and sexuality in our lives after 60. Today's presentation will feature Barry McCarthy, a professor of psychology, certified sex therapist, and author of Rekindling Desire, who will review and discuss the myths about aging after 60. So next week, we're going to be continuing this presentation and diving deeper into the physical tools that we can use for empowerment with Elise Bosnight, who's a urologist in sexual medicine and a PA. So my buddy here, Chantel, my partner, is going to put the link for that in the chat. So if you haven't already registered for session 2, you can. You'll also get it in the follow-up email. And on June 16th, we are going to wrap up this series with a presentation by Macy Day, licensed professional counselor and certified Hakomi therapist and certified sex therapist, on ways that mindfulness can enrich our sex lives. So we have a large number of people here today, so that we do ask that you stay muted. We're going to launch into the presentation soon and reserve time both at the middle and the end for your questions. So if your questions arise during today's presentation with Barry McCarthy, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A session, the Q&A section, excuse me. You might be able to find the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen in the line of icons. You may need to click on the 3 dots to the right that say More to access the Q&A feature. But if you put your questions there, Chantel and I it'll be easier for us to monitor those. You'll also see the chat. Please use the chat box to engage with one another. Let us know where you're from. Let us know what you hope to get out of today's session. And as I mentioned, we will be recording. It will only record those who are spotlighted, but please keep your mute button checked. And I will go ahead and say hello to the other face on the screen right now, Chantel Caro, who helped to organize, coordinate to deliver this presentation to you today. Chantel, if you want to introduce yourself and share any other information with our folks.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much, Rebecca. I'm excited to be here, as hopefully all of you are today. Excited to hear the years of wisdom and expertise that Barry is going to be sharing with us all. As Rebecca said, my name is Chantel Caro. I am a faculty member at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. I'm in our gerontology program. I predominantly work with our students in our online master's and certificates program. I'll keep it my introduction really short. Another thing I'd want to say before we turn things over and get our conversation started today is setting a bit of an intention for us. We would like to acknowledge that our discussion today is likely just the tip of the iceberg when we're talking about sexual expression and aging. And so our experience, our sexual identities are varied, and age is just another factor that adds to that kind of unique experience. So a goal for our discussion today is to be respectful, to be inclusive of our unique positions, our identities, and the experiences that we'll have as we age. And I'll throw it back to Rebecca and Barry.
Thank you, Chantel. And so this is a conversation. I'm going to bring our main speaker in now and by adding a spotlight to Barry, and we'll say goodbye to Chantel for just a few minutes. And here we are. Hey, Barry.
Hi, glad to be here.
We are so fortunate to have you here with us, really a leader, pioneer in this field who happens to also reside in North Carolina. So Barry, how and when did your interest in sexuality and aging start?
Well, I taught my first sexuality class when I was 27 years old. It was at American University. I actually taught there for 50 years. And believe it or not, it was before they had any textbooks in sexuality field. And I really enjoyed the students, and I've always enjoyed the students for the whole 50 years. But one of the things I asked them is, how many of you can imagine your grandparents being sexual? It's only about 1 out of 12. That was true way back in the 70s. It's true in 2023. By and large, there is not an acceptance of the positive role of sexuality in people's lives and people's relationships. And that's one of the things that I advocate for, is for a sexuality that is positive, realistic, and can have a positive role for both genders and their relationship. Most of the research that has been done and most of the clinical writing is on traditional heterosexual couples, female couples who were either married or partnered. But that in fact, much of what we learn is applicable to gay folks, to lesbian folks, to transgender folks, to single folks. So it isn't just a narrow view of sex. It is an all-encompassing view of sex and the role of sex in people's lives and relationships.
You mentioned that most of the research has been done on heteronormative couples. Do you see that changing in the future, that there might become more research and inquiry into other types of relationships?
I think one of the things that is really important in understanding sexuality, whether you're married or partnered, whether you're straight or gay or transgender, whether you're single, is you want touching and sexuality to play a positive role in your life and a positive role in whatever relationship you have. I think that there's an increasing understanding that that sexuality is not a zero-sum game, that it can work for all kinds of folks, and that's what you want to encourage. You want to encourage not this is the right way versus the wrong way. You want to encourage a respect for individual, couple, and cultural differences.
That is the edge that we're growing into, isn't it? That respect for individuals and their preferences. Beautiful. And one final question before you take it away. I'm curious if anything, you've been in this field for a while, if anything has surprised you in the field of sexuality and aging.
Well, the thing that is most fascinating and most applicable to aging people is that when I learned about sexuality in 1970s, the focus was on arousal and orgasm, and the focus was on individual sex performance. And it turns out we were totally wrong. That there's a new mantra now sexually, and that the mantra is desire, pleasure, eroticism, and satisfaction. And the most important factor is not individual performance. It is a coupled process of sharing pleasure. That pleasure is the essence of sexuality, not performance. And the thing that has also very, very much surprised me is that what people used to believe is that as long as you have functional sex, everything will be okay. And what the new understanding is the core issue is desire, and that you really need to attend to desire. And what desire is all about is about anticipation, a sense that you deserve for sexuality to work at this time in your life and in this relationship, even if you've got a disability, even though you're 78 years old, even though your body is quite different than it was 20 years ago. This idea that desire is about anticipation and deserving is a concept that I think is a wonderful concept. You're going to hear this more than once in this workshop. That when people think about desire, they think about young people, they think about chromatic sex, they think about perfect bodies. The major concept is called responsive male and responsive female sexual desire. That's what predicts staying sexual in your 60s, 70s, and 80s.
So desire predicts what being sexual means in your later years.
Absolutely.
That is a good note to pass the talking stick over to you, Barry, to take it away. We'll be in the background and we'll pop in halfway through to moderate some questions. Okay.
That sounds wonderful.
Thank you.
So let me start off with the good news. I always like the good news. The good news is there's very clear science that got into New England Journal of Medicine that you can be sexual at least until age 85. Not only can you be sexual, but sexual satisfaction actually can go up with aging, not down. And sexual satisfaction is all about a sense of acceptance, an acceptance of a new normal sexual. Now, let me give you the bad news. The bad news is that about 1 out of 3 couples stop being sexual between 60 and 65, and 2 out of 3 between 70 and 75. That, for most people, is a loss and a bad choice. Now, one of the things that when I do my professional workshops, I say to people, who do you think decides to stop being sexual? Is it traditionally women, couples, or the man? And almost invariably, couples wins, women are second, and men are third in terms of who decides to stop being sexual. But the science is just the opposite. It's the man's choice, the traditional man's choice in the great majority of cases. It isn't because he wants to stop being sexual. It's because he's lost his confidence with erections and intercourse. And he says to himself, he doesn't say it to his partner. He just avoids his partner. He says to himself, I don't want to start something I can't finish. And what is happening here is he's defining sex, not as a 65 or 75 or 85-year-old person and couple. He's defining the old way, that sex was best when it was spontaneous erections, easy erections, and every sexual opportunity went to intercourse and orgasm. That spells big trouble. People who believe that and stay with that usually stop being sexual in their 50s and 60s. Couples who adopt this new mantra of sexuality can be sexual in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Let me say one other thing, again, in terms of teaching these college students. People, and in doing workshops, including international, people are very interested in sexuality issues, but not sex and aging. So among college students, only 1 out of 13 believe that their grandparents are still sexual. When I do my international workshops, the lowest attendance is the sex and aging. We need to be positive and affirmative and accepting of the new reality of sex and aging. So there's basically 3 things I'd like you to take from this workshop. It may be too simplistic, but you should have handouts in your, I'm terrible at technology and whatever your box is in. And there's an exercise called the Crucial Couple Sexual Dialogue, 5 Dimensions of Touch. If you take nothing from this workshop, that's what I want you to take. And I want you to take it home. There's nothing, it's not copyrighted. You can change it and modify it in any way you want in terms of fitting your values and your relationship. But basically, it redefines sex. It challenges the idea that sex equals intercourse. That what you want to do is you want to value 5 levels of touch: affection, sensual touch, playful touch, erotic non-intercourse touch, and intercourse. And that rather than saying that sex equals intercourse, most couples only have 2 gears. They have affection, they have intercourse. What I am saying to you is there's 5 gears of touch. Affection is very, very important. I'm very pro-affection, but affection is not sexual. But sensual touch and scenarios, playful touch and scenarios, erotic non-intercourse touch and scenarios are all sexual. And that the biggest thing with intercourse, the major reason that males fail at intercourse and Viagra with intercourse is as soon as he gets an erection, he rushes to intercourse because he's afraid he's going to lose it. And it actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. That one of the most valuable concepts is do not transition to intercourse until your subjective arousal. And subjective arousal is even more important than objective arousal in terms of erections and lubrications. Your subjective arousal is at least a 7 and preferably an 8 on a 10-point scale where 0 is neutral and 10 is orgasm. So it's to basically redefine sexuality to include sensual, playful, and erotic touch, as well as intercourse touch. And that you integrate intercourse into the couple's sexuality rather than be seen by the man as a pass-fail test. Did I get an erection? Did I do intercourse or not? When sex becomes a pressure-oriented pass-fail test, they're halfway there to having major problems. That the way to think of intercourse is a way of being sexual, but not the only way. If you look at a typical couple over 65, when they are sexual, they will not have 100% of the time will not transition to intercourse. It's more like 65 to 85% of the time. But that doesn't mean it's a failure. You turn towards your partner and say to the partner, this might not be an intercourse night, but it will be, let's make it a positive night. Let's make it a sensual night, a playful night, or an erotic non-intercourse night. And that fourth gear, erotic non-intercourse sex, is one of the more controversial, but it's also one of the most helpful of all the concepts about sexuality. So the first step is redefine sex to include a broad-based, flexible sexual repertoire rather than an individual pass-fail sexual test. The second thing to emphasize is called good enough couple sexuality. That so much we've emphasized sex as an individual measure. Does she have an orgasm? Does he have an erection? Get away from that kind of measurements. Instead, embrace a new measurement, which is good enough sex, which is all about pleasure. It's all about a couple, seeing sexuality as a couple issue. And it's all about acceptance, whether the sex is marvelous, really good, okay, mediocre, or even dissatisfying and dysfunctional. You turn toward each other and you accept that sexual experience. That good enough sex is everything from fabulous to disappointing. But you treat it as a couple issue, not an individual performance. And it's all about sharing pleasure rather than about intercourse and orgasm. So you want to embrace good enough sex, not that you're settling for good enough sex, that in fact, good enough sex is much more genuine, it's much healthier, and it's much more realistic than performance-oriented sex. So it's broadening the definition of sexuality, it's accepting good enough sex, and then the third core issue is about desire. Looking for, what do you mean by desire? Do you mean like, I love romantic love movies. I've always been a great moviegoer. It's not that kind of desire. That makes better for a film than it makes for real couples in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Real people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s understand that most sexual desire, which is the important category, is responsive desire, not spontaneous desire. In other words, you will often begin a sexual encounter not with an automatic or easy erection, or not with feeling horny or wanting to be sexual. You often will begin at neutral. And as you engage in giving and receiving pleasure-oriented touch, sensual and especially sensual and playful touch, and you're aware of your feelings and your partner's feelings, that's when you feel desire. So arousal happens before desire. That is a breakthrough understanding and concept that really motivates and empowers people to talk the same language about sex. That one of the best things about that approach to desire is that you need each other as intimate and erotic allies. So many couples will think of their partner as their intimate ally, but not their erotic ally. This idea that intimacy is for women and eroticism for men is a poison. You want both partners to value responsive desire. You want both partners to value pleasure. You want both partners to value eroticism. Eroticism is not about males. It's not about porn. It's not about performance. Eroticism is about intense emotions and intense sensations and intense feelings. And you want to emphasize satisfaction. And satisfaction means you feel better about yourself after a sexual experience. You feel more energized and bonded as a couple and you feel desired and desirable. And that includes desired and desirable, even when you're overweight, even when you're disappointed with an adult child or grandchild, even when there's medical problems or financial problems. You turn toward each other and you focus on, I still deserve pleasure in my life and in this relationship. So I know it sounds really easy when I say it in 5 minutes. But again, it's about a new definition of pleasure-oriented couple sexuality. It's about good enough sex with accepting the whole range of sexual experiences, including disappointing ones. And the best estimate, by the way, is about 5 to 15 to maybe as much as 25% of sexual experiences are mediocre or dissatisfying. That's okay. You don't apologize, you don't panic. You have to accept that as okay if you're really going to accept the value of sexuality, which is vital, which is pleasure-oriented, which is satisfying. And again, as you age, one of the best parts of aging is that sex becomes more of a team sport than it was 20 years ago. Let me give you an example, one of my favorite of all clinical examples. Got a lot of clinical examples that are always true people, they're not made up stories. This was a couple who came to see me for a non-sexual problem, but they were a couple where the man was in his late 70s, she was in her mid 70s. They'd been a sexual couple for over 60 years. And one of the things she said to him is, I like having sex with you so much more now in 2022 than I did when we were teenagers or young adults. And at first that hurt his feelings. But she said to him, listen, let's be honest with each other. When you were a teenager, young adult, you had show-up erections. You didn't need anything from me. You just, it was easy, it was spontaneous, it was totally predictable. Now, in your 60s and 70s, you need me. You have grown-up erections, and I know I'm a part of your grown-up erections. And I know that you piggyback your arousal and my arousal. And that makes me feel so much better about you, about me, and sex in our relationship. I thought that was a brilliant statement. At first it hurt his feelings, but he said, you're right. My grown-up erections are much more genuine. And I need you in a way that I didn't need you 20 years ago. And sex feels much more human, much more satisfying. It's much less predictable. It might not be as, quotes, functional, but it's much, much healthier. And I want to enjoy your sexuality because your sexuality is good for my sexuality. And I think that's the key understanding about sex and aging. That what you do is you instead of having spontaneous desire, easy arousal, whether erections or lubrication, most of the time being orgasmic, and saying, wow, good sex. I love that kind of sex. I like easy, good sex. But that's not the new normal. The new normal is genuine sexuality, pleasure-oriented sexuality, being turned on by your partner's arousal, and understanding that for sex to be worthwhile for you, you need to be more present, focusing on relaxation, focusing on pleasure, and also welcoming eroticism. Now, let me say one other thing about what goes wrong that you don't want to do. When I think of healthy sexuality, actually, let me just say this one thing and then we're going to take some questions and comments. When I think about healthy sexuality, I think it having a number of roles and meanings and outcomes with couples. One of the major mistakes that people make, and they're usually well-intentioned, but it's a terrible mistake, is where the woman turns toward the man and says, look, I know you can't have erections and have intercourse. That's okay. As long as we're intimate, nothing else matters. It's well-intentioned, but it's harmful. Because what it's saying to him is that you no longer can have vital sexuality. It's okay to just be a cuddly couple. Again, I'm in favor of being a cuddly couple. But what happens when you say that is you de-eroticize the partner, you de-eroticize the relationship. People don't need sympathy, they need empathy. They need to turn toward each other to share giving and receiving pleasure. And one of the best advantages of aging is it gives the woman's voice an erotic component to it that allows her to feel good about her body and good about her partner's body and good about the relationship. Now, maybe this is a good time to take a 2-minute break for questions, comments, reactions. Am I talking too vaguely, or am I talking specifically enough that's helpful? So do you have some questions?
So yeah, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A now. It's a good time to get the intermission questions in. No, I think you're right in the zone, Barry. One question that arose for me was, we've been talking a lot about couples, and some people aren't in a coupled relationship. Right. And
absolutely.
What do you know about sexual expression as we age as not in a couple?
Right, in their 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yeah. People
can be single, widowed, divorced, never married, gay folks, the whole range. The basic big three still holds. What you want to do is, you don't have to be married or be in a committed relationship. One of the things that I say to people is that one of your options is to have a sexual friendship. And a sexual friendship is totally different than hookup sex. A sexual friendship is a relationship where you, like any other friendship, it's going to end probably, but you treat each other well. You work together as intimate and erotic friends in that relationship. And you say that your sexual feelings and needs are as important as my sexual feelings and needs. We want to be good couple. We want to trust each other, be comfortable with each other, and not feel that we're being manipulated. It's not transactional sex. It is a genuine giving and taking of pleasure. So this idea that you have to be in a married or committed relationship, or you have to be straight, is nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I really...
Who you are and how you accept who you are and how touching and sexuality works within that.
Yeah, it sounds like how the relationship you have with yourself is equally important to the relationship that you might have with others in some ways. Chantel, did you have a question to raise?
Oh, well, I'll actually, I have some of my own, but I'll go to our audience members first. We had someone in the Q&A, Barry. If you could be a little bit more specific about how you differentiate, or when you're saying sympathy versus empathy with your partner.
So sympathy means, poor person, you're not the person you used to be sexually, but I can accept you for who you are, given that we're not going to have vital sexuality. That is not helpful. What is helpful is to say, you feel more, you have more vulnerabilities psychologically, physiologically, relationally than you did 20 years ago. But we can work together on those vulnerabilities and create a new way of talking about and approaching touching and sexuality that will increase our pleasure and our enjoyment. The big thing that when people go into couple sex therapy, and people do in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, the big difference is they do psychosexual skill exercises to increase comfort, to increase pleasure, to increase eroticism. People can, 60s, 70s, and 80s is not too late to do that. And empathy is all about respecting your partner and respecting yourself as sexual people.
Thank you so much, Barry. We can take another one. Do you feel good about another question? So in the chat, we have a couple coming up too. So one of our audience members, a little bit more specific scenario for you. So their partner has survived prostate cancer, is having some functional inability or dysfunction, and is wanting to know what level of intimacy should be had.
I think part of it is your openness and willingness, individually as a couple, to engage with each other, to actually do the exercises about sensuality, do the exercises about erotic non-intercourse sex. what happens with so many people in terms of prostate cancer and other kinds of cancers. Let me give you the good news first, right? Let's do the good news first. There is no illness and no disability that stops sexual desire. What illness and disability does, including prostate cancer, is that it interferes with sexual function. The question, the challenge to you is how to still enjoy your body and enjoy sexuality with that challenge. So one of the biggest challenges for most people with prostate cancer is you can have an orgasm, but you no longer ejaculate. So you're not ejaculating out through your penis. You do have an orgasm, and the semen goes into your body, into your testicles. So the question becomes, where can I feel the most enjoyment, the most pleasure, and really emphasize that? And that one of the things that happens with men with prostate cancer is that they find it easier to be orgasmic than they do to have intercourse. So many of these men will say, I've never been orgasmic with manual stimulation or oral stimulation or rubbing stimulation. This is a chance to do that. And it also is a chance to talk both with your partner and, if you will, one of the things I always tell couples who are thinking about medical intervention is go as a couple to see the urologist, or to go, if you're dealing with diabetes, go as a couple to see the endocrinologist and say, I'm not asking for sex therapy. I'm asking, what can I do or not do biomedically that would increase my sexual pleasure? So many men after prostate cancer really get comfortable with erotic non-intercourse sex. And some of the time it'll flow to intercourse, but there's other men where it doesn't flow to intercourse at all. And to accept that as a necessary loss, but not giving up their sexuality or giving up their partner's sexuality. Remember that an involved, aroused partner is the major aphrodisiac. I hope that's specific enough.
I think so. We'll see if we have follow-up questions in our chat. Let me go to another question if you're okay with that, because it's come up a couple of times, and I wonder if I can't maybe pair a couple of questions up here. So we've had a couple of questions in the chat and in our Q&A about individuals who are not in a partnership, or where the availability of a partner is not there. And let me throw out in that context, right, two kind of it seems like lines of thinking or lines of questioning. One being, the availability of a partner is not there, but I still want to have an intimate connection with someone. The other being, the availability of a partner is not there, or I am single, and how can I be intimate perhaps with myself?
Right. So the first thing is, you deserve to be sexual as a single person, whether you're 65 or 85. One of the best and easiest ways of being sexual is with self-stimulation masturbation. The majority of men and women in their past have masturbated, and many in their 60s, 70s, and 80s do. Accepting masturbation as healthy and positive for the single person is really helpful, but also for the partner person. One of the things I say is that most people say, I wish I had a committed relationship, but wishing is not enough. You've got to be aware of what are the advantages of committed relationships, what are the potential problems of them. The reason I am so much in favor of sexual friendship is that it allows you to feel genuinely connected to another person and say to the person before being sexual, here's where I stand sexually, here's my strengths, here's my vulnerability. Let's try to create something that is really good for both of us. I'm not performing for you. I'm trying to share pleasure with you. I'm trying to share eroticism with you. This idea that only partnered people or only married people can be sexual, I think, is a mistake. You've got to look at what your situation is and what your values are and what fits or doesn't fit for
you. Great. Thank you so much. How about one more, and then we'll kind of move forward, and then have room for other questions. Another question that came in, I guess this is maybe from your own perhaps work with other couples or other people. What is your advice or position on scheduling intimacy?
About doing what?
Scheduling, so making it a specific point in the week or point in the month or however.
Again, you've got to figure out what works for you. But the problem of scheduling sex, like you schedule going to the grocery store, is a mistake. It takes away this sense of emotional connection and anticipation. That one of the things that is helpful to people is to try to find bridges to sexual desire. That's a sex therapy concept. What allows you to anticipate being sexual? You know, one of the most interesting things about sex and aging is that very few people choose to be sexual in the traditional late night time. The most common time that they choose to be sexual is before or after a nap, or early evening, or late morning, where they're more energetic, where they're feeling healthier, where they're more interested in it. One of the things that I think helps a lot is to have to break up the week and basically say one partner gets, Friday morning until Sunday night to initiate, and they can initiate when they want, and the other partner gets the other week. So that you want both people to be able to initiate in their own way, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, whether it's playful or it's romantic. There isn't one right way to do that. The problem with scheduled sex is it feels like going to the grocery store. It's not to be anticipated. It's not that sense of deserving pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, let's move forward, and I'll keep on holding questions. We'll have time in the end.
So remember that satisfaction is all about positive, realistic expectation. It's not about perfect sex. Sexuality with aging is anti-perfectionistic. And that one of the things you want to accept is that hopefully, if you're really feeling good about yourself and your partner and your sexuality, that still less than half of the encounters will be mutual and synchronous. Much more commonly, it'll be better for one partner than the other, but it'll be good for the relationship. Because remember, one of the reasons you want to be sexual, it's to energize your bond and allow you to feel desired and desirable with your age, with your disability, with your disappointments in life. It's about energizing, and it's about sharing both the good and the bad experiences. And when it's a bad experience, that 5 to 15%, you turn toward the partner and able to say, that was a bummer, but let's be sexual in the next week or so to have a little more alive, alert, and awake. The other thing that I encourage people to do is to have good conversations about the role of intimacy and sexuality in their life. The worst time to talk sex is when you're nude in bed after a negative experience. People say in things that they don't want to say and that cause harm. The best time to talk sex is the day before a sexual encounter. It can be on a walk, or it can be gardening together. It can be over a glass of wine or a cup of tea. When you say to your partner, next time we're sexual, this is what I'd like to try. Again, there's no guarantees it's going to work, but are you open to trying this? And here's something that, again, in terms of very specific, that I'd really love you to take. And that is, unless you have the power of veto, you have the power to say no to a sexual scenario or technique, you don't have the freedom to enjoy couple sexuality. But saying no or vetoing something doesn't mean avoiding. It means, I don't like this scenario, this technique. Let me offer you a different way of connecting. It can be, again, taking a walk or having a cup of tea, or it can be an erotic non-intercourse experience. But probably the most common alternative is a playful sexual experience. Think about sex on a 10-point scale. 0 is neutral, 10 is orgasm. Affection is non-sexual, but it anchors you at 1. Sensual is between 1 and 3 in terms of sensations and feelings. Playful, which intermixes genital and non-genital, but not in an erotically charged way, gets you from 3 to 6. And then erotic non-intercourse sex can get you from 7 to 10, or 7 to 9, and then you switch to intercourse. This basic concept that says, I want to value pleasure-oriented touch, not just receiving it, but giving it too. Most people, and this is something you ought to talk about with your partner and think about yourself. Are you somebody who focuses on one kind of stimulation, or are you a multiple stimulator? Most people are multiple stimulators. And you like mutual stimulation, which is called partner interaction arousal, or do you like taking turns, which is self-entrancement arousal? Again, it's not a right or wrong. It's a question of what are your sexual feelings, what are your sexual preferences, and what are the things you want to veto that says that just doesn't fit for me. You know, I can remember a couple, again, an older couple where the man had read both in sex sites, but also through male friends, about all women love cunnilingus and receiving cunnilingus. He was in a relationship with a woman who said, I love receiving manual stimulation, but I don't enjoy receiving oral stimulation. I don't care what the statistics say. That isn't me. She has a right to veto that. He has a right to respect, and he should respect her veto, but not go away. To involve, what kind of involvement really works for them as a couple? When I work clinically with folks, it's one of the things that really surprises them. They'll say, you know, we've been a couple for 30 years. I didn't know you were a multiple stimulator. I didn't know that you feel good about using erotic fantasy on your own head when we're being sexual, that's a turn on for you. Again, it's like masturbation. People don't talk about it, but they do it. Erotic fantasy by its nature tends not to be socially acceptable, but it is highly charged and it can be erotic. Think about it as not as a bridge to desire as much as a bridge to high arousal and orgasm. So many men are used to very predictable sex. They say, that's how I learned. That's real male sexuality. That's junk. Total, absolute nonsense and junk. That one of the advantages of sexuality with aging for men is that the sex that you experience with your partner, again, whether you're married or partner, straight or gay, whatever, is more genuine. And it is ultimately more satisfying. And basically, you can teach responsive desire. You can teach how to increase your bridges to desire in a way you can't do with spontaneous desire. So it's more teachable, it's more genuine, and in the long run, it's more satisfying. Now,
You been to Colorado?
Mm-hmm.
pardon?
Sorry, if I can remind everyone to mute, that would be great. Thanks so much.
Okay, so, you know, when I talk to males especially, because remember, it's males who give up on something, I say to them, why don't you be a wise man, not a traditional man? Traditional men stop being sexual in their 50s and 60s. Wise men are sexual in their 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Oh.
And part of being wise is accepting the reality of yourself sexual. That what all males prefer is the spontaneous erection, easy erection, going to intercourse in their first erection, and enjoying being orgasmic intravaginally. That's a great preference. It's a terrible demand. It's a terrible demand because it kills desire. It turns you off. You can't reach those performance needs. Allow yourself to be open to not just giving touch, but receiving touch and most men like giving touch when they're receiving. But again, you got to figure out what works for you. You also have to figure out whether you're a single stimulator or multiple stimulator. Do you like giving and receiving at the same time? You like focusing on one thing? Do you enjoy your partner's arousal? Can you piggyback your arousal on your partner's arousal? Those are the kinds of things that people talk about either in a therapist's office or they talk about as they're out for a walk or they're gardening together. Those are sexual conversations that are of great, great value. And they confront the myths about this is what it means to be a real sexual person. Now, We've got about 14 more minutes. So let me say just a couple more things. When people talk about healthy relationships, they're not talking about primarily sex. They're talking about having a satisfying, secure relationship. Secure means is different and stable. Secure means you value your partner and you value your bond. And that the role of sex within that satisfying, secure bond is that 15 to 20% role of energizing you and allowing you to feel more desire and desirable. And it's a real paradox, because what I say to my folks is if you stay sexual when you're 60, 70, that's going to improve the quality of your life more than putting $200,000 into your retirement fund. And I really believe that. I believe that empirically, I believe it clinically, I believe it personally in terms of my own life. You know, I started teaching this when I was 27. I'm going to be 80 in September. I think it's a very good investment in quality of life and quality of relationship by embracing this new, variable, flexible approach to sexuality. I also think about healthy sexuality with aging as being anti-perfectionistic. You want to be accepting. You don't want to set a perfectionistic standard. Well, one of my favorite of all the psychosexual skill exercises to help people regain their comfort and confidence with each other and with their bodies is to have them engage, have their partner hold them while they engage in self-stimulation. That is, again, normal and healthy, whether you're male, female, straight, or gay. But also, if they don't like doing that, they can have the partner stimulating them, but also feeling connected to the partner. You really want to have a more broad, flexible repertoire. And you never want to apologize sexually. You never want to panic about sexuality. You want to turn towards your partner and say, this isn't going to be an intercourse night, or it's a shame, but let's make this a sensual night, or let's make this an erotic non-intercourse night, or let's make this a playful night. It can be synchronous or it can be non-synchronous. That what sexuality is about is increasing the vitality of the relationship and our connection with each other. When they have a negative, you know, afterplay is the most ignored aspect of sexual function. Most people either don't do afterplay or they do a quick kiss, I love you, and go to sleep. One of the things I say, whether they do it once a month or once every other week, is that they have an afterplay scenario that they really like. It can be a sensual scenario, it can be a playful scenario, it can be an intimate scenario. But afterplay increases satisfaction. When I do clinical work in sexuality, I do not terminate with the couple until they've had at least one negative experience. I want them to have confidence when they have a negative sexual experience, which is going to happen, whether it happens once a year or once every 10 times or once every 3 times, where you don't apologize, you don't panic, you turn toward the partner and say, that was a negative experience. Let's get together in the next couple of days and have a positive experience. Or we can do a backup scenario, but no apology and no panicking. I think we said you wanted 10 more minutes for questions. So let me just say one last thing, and then we'll take some more questions and comments. And again, what you should have in your thing is 5 pages of handouts, guidelines for sexuality after 60, a new model of sexuality after 60, and the crucial couple sexual dialogue. Feel free to hand that out to your friends, to modify it yourself, to do it any way you want. It's not copyrighted. But what you owe yourself in your relationship in terms of quality of life is having a sexuality that feels genuine to you, that bonds you, that energizes you, and you take pride in beating the odds and staying sexual and having a satisfying sexual life. So on that, final comments, questions, reactions? This is the time to do it. We've got 9 minutes according to my computer.
Hi, Barry. Yes, we do have some questions. I'll
Sure.
go through the Q&A first, and then I earmarked one in the chat. But when thinking in our Q&A, another kind of scenario question for you, a couple that spends all day together, maybe work in the same house, maybe work remotely. How do you suggest couples shift from that kind of work mode all day together to a desirous or intimate mode?
I think it's great to have rituals. One of the best rituals is taking a walk together or taking a run together. Another ritual is taking a shower or bath together. Another ritual is meeting over a cup of glass of wine or a cup of tea and chatting not about work and other things, but chatting about their experiences with each other, their favorite trip that they're planning to go on, their favorite intimate memory. What are bridges that really work for you? That's the question to ask yourself. And rather than saying there's one right way, one right bridge, try 1, 2, 3, or 4 bridges and say, does that put me in a much more connected mood? The other thing are people who watch videos together or experiment with a sexual toy together.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Barry. Another scenario, this person is 75, it has no libido, has tried different ways to obtain arousal, tried HRT before, however, that resulted in other health complications. Masturbation individually, no issues. So I guess trying to figure out what to do to get to the point of penetration, or if that's something that it seems like something they want.
Okay.
So what other options
One of
are
the things that I would be talking about with that person is if they can masturbate to orgasm, that means they have the sexual potential and desire. That basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to find some kind of standalone medical or other kind of intervention that will jumpstart libido. That isn't the way it works. Responsive desire is the way that it works. And that, let me plug a book that is not one of my books. I like to plug my books too. But the book that I would plug, if it's a female, is Mindfulness and Sex Therapy by Lori Brado. It's one of the best books for women. The other really great book, except it's for younger women, is Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. But there's great resources. You know, the problem with the sex field is that about 40% of sex books and websites cause you damage. About 40 to 50% don't damage you, they're just irrelevant. The number of good resources is very small. It really is very small. And that's especially true when it comes to things like desire. Responsive desire is the name of the game for most people, and learning sexual desire as in terms of your psychological, your biomedical, and your social relational resources that would promote desire. That the hard thing for most people is getting from 0 to 5 or 6. And getting from 0 to 5, 6 is all about openness and pleasure, and is all about not trying to rush into intercourse. If you can feel desire with sensual touch or feel desire with erotic non-intercourse touch, that's when you then transition to intercourse. And remember the data that the great majority of women, especially with aging, find it much easier to be orgasmic on erotic sex than intercourse sex. That this definition that intercourse is the real sexual measure is the major barrier to healthy sexuality and aging.
Thanks so much. We had a question, and I didn't catch this one, so I can't remember the context you were speaking in, Barry. But a participant wants to know, what do you mean by synchronous and asynchronous?
So asynchronous, which is easier to define, is high levels of desire, high levels of pleasure, high levels of eroticism, high levels of satisfaction for both partners. What asynchronous usually means is it's much better for one partner, like it's on a 10-point scale, it's a 9 or a 10 for one partner, it's a 3 or 5 or 7 for the other partner. But it doesn't mean it's bad for the other partner. One of the things I always tell people is don't do something sexually that's bad for you. You have a right to veto that. But vetoing is healthy. Avoiding is unhealthy because it makes it more and more aversive. The more you avoid, the more self-conscious and anxious you get sexually.
Well, let's try one more, and then I want to make sure I'm respectful of everyone's time, and we can do a little closeout too. But I think this question kind of piggybacks on what you just said. So one of our participants asked about if the female partner has pain during intercourse, but the partner would still like intercourse daily or several times per day. And it sounds like you're suggesting a veto is better than an avoiding, but I guess if you would say anything beyond that.
Basically, that does not sound like a healthy pattern to me. It sounds like on the man's part, it's a compulsive pattern. On the woman's part, it's a pain problem. That the way to deal with pain is not to think about it as a sex problem, but as a pain disorder. And that the best professional to help with female sexual pain is a female physical therapist with a subspecialty in pelvic muscles, to teach the woman, but also to show the partner what happens with intercourse. And one of the most valuable concepts is that you don't want to, the old way of having intercourse, what most people don't do in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, is man on top intercourse, short, rapid thrusting. That's what is most likely to cause pain. Using different intercourse positions, but especially using circular thrusting, is much more likely to be enjoyable and not painful. But I really encourage for her to go to a physical therapist with a subspecialty in pelvic pain, who will also show the partner where and how she feels the pain.
Excellent, that's great, great advice. So I will, just in the presence of time, I think I'm going to try to close up here, just to respect all of your time today. And I would like to say thank you so much, Barry. This was a wonderful conversation. I believe many of our audience also feels that this was a really riveting conversation to perhaps questions we don't really get. And we're getting a lot of thank yous already in the chat. I'd like to remind everyone that we have 2 more sessions for this series. I will throw the links to both of those. Oh, actually, Rebecca is already on it. The links to both of those will be in your chat on June. Let me get my dates up here. On next Friday, June 16th, we'll have a conversation, or excuse me, next Friday, June 9th, my apologies. We'll have Let's Get Physical, Tools for Sexual Empowerment with Elise Fosnight from 10 to 11. And Rebecca shared the registration link in your chat. On the following Friday, June 16th, we'll have What's in a Number, Erotic Expansion Across the Lifespan with Macy Day, also from 10 to 11 a.m. We hope to see you all there. And again, thank you so much, Barry. I hope this gets conversations going for people, coupled, non-coupled, seeking partners, not seeking partners. And I hope those handouts, remember, check your emails for the handouts Barry referenced throughout our conversation today, and that people will check them out and people will use them in their own daily lives or share, who knows, or all of the above.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chantel. Thank you, Barry. We hope that you got a lot out of this session. I know that I did, and we hope to see you next week. So we will say bye for now and see you soon. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.